Hello everyone, welcome back. This is the sixth video of my Zero build series. In this video I show you how I build the folding wingtips upgrade for my A6M2 Zero Type21 from Eduard. This upgrade set looks so cool, I definitely wanted to use it for my Zero. Most of the folded wings from World War II change the overall shape and the overall look of the aircraft, like the Corsair or the Hellcat. The Zero is different because only the last bit of the wings folded. This is the 3D printed resin upgrade set. It contains only a few parts, 4 high-quality 3D printed parts and a small PE sheet. I really like that the parts were in a small plastic box to protect them. I carefully cut off all the parts from the print supports and I cleaned them to make them ready for construction. Right here at the beginning I made a mistake. Well, it wasn't really a mistake. Let me explain. On the surface of the wingtips the printed layers are visible. I sanded it back, but I didn't want to go too deep because the surface details are so microscopic and I didn't want to lose them. However, it would have been better if I sand them a little bit more. The layers were still visible. I hoped that the primer and the paint layers would smoothen the surface, but it didn't happen. So I would recommend that sand a bit more, but be careful about the details. For me, the surface details are more important. The visible ribs have lightning holes. To make them more pronounced, I drilled them deeper with a thin CNC drill bit. I used drill bits from 0.3 mm to 1 mm. The upgrade set provides two options. Option A is a PE rib at the end of the wings and option B is a printed part at the end of the wings. Option A is easier to build but not as realistic as option B. The wings have to be cut differently for the two options. The instruction clearly shows the cut lines. For option B, I recommend cutting at the panel line and sanding it back with a sanding stick. In this way we have more control. For cutting I used a razor saw. I used sanding sticks from 400 grit to 1000 grit. Inside the wings I shaped the socket for the 3D printed parts. I used diamond coated file 200 grit and 400 grit. For gluing I used gel superglue. Gel superglue gives a bit of extra time to set the parts to the desired position. Obviously there are unwanted gaps at the freshly installed parts. I used Vallejo's plastic putty. I placed masking tape next to the gap and put the putty on the mask. With a toothpick I applied as much putty as I needed. With this technique the parts won't be too messy. Only the necessary amount of putty would be used. The excess can be easily wiped off with a wet Q-tip. Then I smoothened the surface with fine sanding sponges. There was a small handle under the wingtips for the opening mechanism. This handle is not part of the set, so I made it from leftover PE parts. First I used a razor blade to deepen the edges, and then with a sharp fine chisel I made the cavity deep enough. Lastly, with a hobby blade I cleared the edges. It's a very simple modification, but the result looks quite good. The PE parts, the little handles, were glued at the end of the build after all the parts had been installed and painted. There is a video on YouTube where the owner of an original A6M describes how the wingtip mechanism works. I put the link in the description so you can watch it if you are interested. The navigation lights at the tip of the wings are not part of the set. We have to use the transparent parts from the kit. The ProfiPack kit contains a paint mask, which makes masking much easier. I fill the gaps with liquid putty at the edges and then apply this paint mask from the kit on the navigation lights. I used Mr. Surfacer 1200 primer, which is one of my favorite primers. The primer showed that the printed layers were still visible, so I sanded a bit again. However, I was worried about the surface details, so I tried not to go too far with sanding and kept the surface details. I didn't want to rescribe or re-drill, re-wet the details on the surface. In retrospect, I could have sanded a bit deeper, but it is what it is now. I'll be better in my next build. By the way, these printed layers are barely visible to the naked eye. The camera lens is more detailed, so it's not that bad. After I primed the surface again, I painted a thin layer of XF76 grey-green from Tamiya. Then I applied white marble patches. I recommend adding a drop of paint retarder to your white mixture. It makes painting with thin paint much more manageable. After the white marbling technique, I highlighted the panel lines, the edges and the rivet lines with darker brown color. Finally, I applied multiple thin XF76 layers. I like to use super thin layers and build the desired tone step by step, layer by layer. In this way, I have more control over keeping the pre-shading effect visible under the final color. In the final episode of this mini-series, I will show and explain all the painting techniques I used on the Zero, so stay tuned. I use brushes to paint the fine details. For the Otake color, I used Mr. Hobby H63 Metallic Blue-Green. I used clear red and clear blue from Tamiya to make the colors of the navigation lights. From the 67th plane onwards, folding wingtips and landing hooks were added for carrier operations. This was model 21. The model 11 and 21 are both called A6M2, and there was no difference in engine or airframe. The folding wingtips were necessary for carrier operations because the aircraft elevator from the deck of the aircraft carrier wasn't as wide as the original 12 meters wingspan design. With these folding parts, the wingspan of the Zero was reduced to 11 meters. The installation of the parts was easy. There are two hinges on the folding part of the wingtip, and these hinges were fitted perfectly. I used a tiny drop of gel superglue. After the gel superglue set, I used regular superglue around the hinges to make the bond stronger. I added extra detail to the build. I added a thin lead wire to make the electric cable to the navigation lights. It's an easy little detail and I believe it looks pretty cool. The very last step was to glue the little handles of the locking mechanism. I recommend watching the video that I mentioned earlier. I put the link in the description below. And that's all. Basically, this was the last of the upgrade sets, the detail videos. The next episode will be the full build, where I show a couple of extra details and I tell the history of this fascinating aircraft that I built. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to ask you to hit the like and subscribe with the little bell and share these videos with your modeler friends. It helps to keep my motivation high. I really appreciate your support, keep modeling, and see you next time.